Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, Assistant Dean for External Relations at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, where I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Catherine Herrold. And Dr. Herrold is an accomplished member of our school's faculty, an internationally renowned researcher on a wide range of topics that she applies to philanthropic studies through her research and through her teaching at our school. And Dr. Herrold, thanks so much for being with us. And you have such a variety of areas of expertise. What led you to this point in your professional development? Did this happen during your schooling? Was there an epiphany of some sort? How did you wind up in the academy?
Well, Bill, first, thank you so much for having me here today. My love of research was actually born on the sixth floor of Mount Holyoke College's library, where I conducted a senior economics. And from then, I just went on to continue research, but I gravitated to studying the nonprofit and voluntary sector. First at the Urban Institute, then I spent a few years in grad school abroad in Europe, where we asked some really critical questions about the voluntary sector. From there, I moved to actually work in a foundation, but I realized that I was more curious about studying philanthropy in the nonprofit sector rather than working in it. So I went to Duke University as a PhD student with some really critical questions about the role of foundations and civil society in a democracy. And I didn't think that I could actually answer those questions by looking at civil society in the United States. Here, our civil society has always been part and parcel of a liberal democracy. So I decided to take a comparative approach. And I saw that foundations, philanthropic foundations, were emerging throughout the Middle East, and particularly in Egypt. So I went off to Egypt in 2010 and began studying local foundations and the wider civil society in Egypt. I've subsequently expanded that research throughout the Middle East, most recently in Palestine.
So, two questions I need to ask you. What was so special about the sixth floor of the Mount Holyoke Library? Not the fifth floor, not the fourth floor, the sixth floor. And then a little more seriously, as you look for that comparative analysis, why the Middle East? Why not Asia? Why not South America? What led you to the Middle East?
Well, the sixth floor was where I found a carrel that was the most quiet and had just a beautiful view of campus. It's the top floor. I always walked up those steps. My senior year, every evening after dinner, I would walk up all the steps to the sixth floor and just put myself in my little carrel and work away. And those were really happy times. I actually went off to Duke thinking that I would study philanthropy and civil society in Central and Eastern Europe, particularly the post-communist area. And but it was a course on comparative political science, actually, that attracted me to the study of liberalized autocracies. These are states where rulers have partly liberalized their political, economic, and civic spheres, but where autocrats remain in tight control. And we had theories of non-governmental organizations or NGOs in those types of states. But grant-making foundations had not yet been studied in those areas extensively. And so with the rise of grant-making foundations, particularly in the Arab world, and with a relatively new research center at the American University in Cairo, the Gerhardt Center for Philanthropy and Civic Engagement, I thought, well, why not choose Egypt as a research site? And so honestly, I just went there in 2010, having no contacts, no idea what I would find, no idea if I could really conduct a project. I spent some time in 2010 gathering some early data. I went back to Duke to finish up a dissertation proposal, and the 2011 Arab Spring uprisings broke out. And so before Mubarak, former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak was even deposed, I bought a plane ticket, flew to Jordan, and I got to Egypt as soon as it was safe to return to the country. And I fell in love with the Middle East, its people, its culture, and I keep going back.
Your timing could not have been better, as there was that inflection point in that region in the world at the same time that you were starting your exploration. And what a pioneering spirit that you didn't know anybody there and you just decided that that was the location you wanted to be in as you were continuing your own studies. What are your academic degrees in, and how does that inform this broad topic that you describe as civil society? Help our audience understand that, please.
Sure. I have an undergraduate degree in economics, so a very quantitative approach to research. My master's degrees are in social policy, and I also have an MBA, actually. The social policy degree was very, very academic, very theoretical. And so we took a really theoretical approach to the study of the voluntary sector, of civil society, of civic organizing, of civic engagement. But I wasn't yet sure if I wanted to pursue a career in research or a career in practice. And so I coupled that with an MBA. And then at Duke, my doctorate is actually in public policy, which is an interdisciplinary field, spanning many of the social sciences. My concentration was in political science. So I'm really informed by the political science discipline, particularly comparative political science, international relations, questions of foreign policy, of course. And all of these come together. That MBA was practical, and it remains practical in terms of thinking about strategy. How do civil society organizations, grant makers, particularly those larger, more professional ones, how do they think about strategy? How can I bring questions of strategy into the classroom, where many of my students are leaders of nonprofit organizations, of philanthropic foundations? So that business degree, while it could seem somewhat tangential, it's actually really critical to my research and teaching. And then, of course, the political science with civil society's role in mobilizing citizens for social change, whether that's democratic political reform or other types of reform that require reform at the political level. That political science really just comes deeply into play. My research also seeks to inform U.S. foreign policy, so that policy aspect of my degree or my training is critically important as well.
When we look at the philanthropic sector, there are times we can say what is unique about the philanthropic sector. How does the philanthropic sector align with the private sector or the public sector, addressing things like market failure and public sector failure, or the philanthropic sector stepping forward on its own? You are living in all three worlds. You're addressing all three sectors, not just with your academic preparation, but now. Can you describe, how does that just bring depth and context to your research, that you're not just looking at philanthropy, but at the private and public sectors as well?
You're right, Bill, and it's funny. I've never really thought about approaching it in any other way, because these sectors are so interconnected. And I would say, particularly in the Middle East. Let me just give you the example of Egypt to start. Or as an illumination point. Mm-hmm. Prior to the fall of Hosni Mubarak, Egypt's grant-making foundations were deeply intertwined with the state through their donors' businesses. Okay, so here we have philanthropy, the state, and the corporate sector all intertwined. Let me explain how. The donors to, and still leaders of, in terms of the board of directors, the governors of Egypt's private foundations, were primarily corporate moguls. Now, in Egypt under Mubarak, the way to do well in business was to be loyal to the regime, because there was a system of crony capitalism through which business people express loyalty to the regime in return for business perks, monopoly rights, kickbacks, etc. Some of Egypt's philanthropists even served in Mubarak's cabinet. And so we saw this tight intertwining. And then in turn, I should say that those philanthropists funded socioeconomic development work that was right in line with the Mubarak regime's economic development goals. So we see this intertwining of politics, of business, of philanthropy really come to the fore in cases like this. So it's really, I just find it very difficult to disentangle those. And that's of course part of my process, is to try to tease out what's at play. But really that intertwined nature I tend to see it throughout my research.
Dr. Herrold, can you describe for our students the benefit that they receive? Each of our faculty members brings expertise and adds to the context and the richness of all that we offer through our 3-degree programs. And you have this added emphasis on an international comparative perspective. And obviously students come to us from international locations and they can apply to their international location. But what about even for a student who says, you know what, I'm here in the continental United States, I'm going to be serving in the continental United States. How does that exposure to the international perspective help them prepare and strengthen either for their own education and enrichment, but also for their professional development in the philanthropic sector?
Well, Bill, I would argue that even those of us who live in the United States, will build our careers here, we live in a globalized world. So it's critical to have a globally informed education. I also argue that we as Americans have so much to learn from the creativity of civil society in other parts of the world. In Egypt, I saw how civil society mobilized through political, economic, and social turmoil to cultivate a form of democracy, not the United States' form of democracy, but a form of democracy that was built around civic mobilization for community-based problem solving, free expression, rights claiming. It was really grounded in fundamental values of freedom, justice, and equality. I saw civil society mobilizing for this, even through the harshest crackdowns on civil society. So what can we learn from the creativity, from the scrappiness of civil societies and civil society organizations' capacity to mobilize citizens across divides, to bring people together for those values of democracy? What can we as Americans learn through that creativity? In Palestine, I study grassroots mobilization through voluntary grassroots organizations that are operating completely outside of the formal NGO sector. What can we learn primarily from these youth about new forms of organizing for freedom, for justice, equality? And I argue that we actually have much more in common with these civil societies than we might imagine at first glance, and that we actually have quite a bit to learn, again, from their creativity and success in mobilizing.
Universities on their best days, we not only learn in the classroom, but we meet different people from different walks of life. We're exposed to different information that we normally are not exposed to, and that can only help us learn, be enriched as people, and let alone inform our professional development as well. And I'm so glad you mentioned your passion for the grassroots. Certainly you've talked a lot about looking at national government, international relations, informing national policy. But I would like to invite you, could you expand a little bit more, please? You also have this passion for what you're seeing at the grassroots level. Help us understand that aspect of your work, please.
Well, in much of the Global South, we've seen the rise of formal NGO sectors, non-governmental organization sectors. And my work and some other work argues that this is actually to the detriment of civil society. Many of these NGOs are large, professional, bureaucratic institutions. They eat up foreign aid. They pay some of the most lucrative salaries in the Global South. They're tethered to their international donors. They lack genuine accountability and deep roots within civil society. They've become shells through which money is made. What we've also seen simultaneously is, or recently I should say, is a backlash against this NGOization of civil society. We've seen the emergence of voluntary grassroots organizations that are mobilizing diverse constituents to revitalize civil society as a sphere of voluntarism, of mobilization, of solidarity. And so it's these groups on which I focus primarily at this point. And these groups are using, I've used the word creativity a number of times, but they're using really creative ways of mobilizing and certainly deploying internet technology. I don't want to overstress the importance of technology, because equally, and in fact more important, is the face-to-face interaction. But that ability to deploy technology at certain junctures to mobilize is critically important. And you and I right now are talking during the coronavirus era, as we're all socially isolated. We're all self-distancing. And we're also facing a crisis of leadership, a governance crisis. Many of our nations are facing crises at the national level. And we need to envision a new normal coming out of this health crisis, of this governance crisis. And I firmly believe that the new normal needs to be envisioned by everyday citizens. And so what roles can grassroots groups, locally embedded grassroots groups, right now through the use of technology, because it's our only option, hopefully soon through face-to-face mobilization, how can grassroots groups bring together everyday citizens across the many divides that we face in society to collectively envision a new normal and to press for change?
One of the very first questions that's asked of our master's students in the very first class that they take, Understanding Philanthropy, is to look at how philanthropy started personal and over time became professionalized, what was gained and what was lost. And from Dr. Herrold's very elaborate conversation there, you can see the complexity of that question and the opportunity that you have to dig deeper as a student at our school. Dr. Herrold, could you help us understand how you translate this into the classroom? Do you teach individual courses on each of these different types of topics? Does your research just kind of fold its way into many different courses? How does that play out in the classroom?
I would say the latter, Bill. I teach courses on comparative civil society, which is of course directly relevant to that research that I mentioned. I teach a course on foundations and grant making, and I'm teaching that course, that introductory course that you just mentioned as well. And so my aim in those courses is that students ask critical questions, think very creatively, and think globally about the types of questions that you just mentioned. What have we gained? What have we lost through the professionalization of philanthropy, through the professionalization of civil society? Other types of critical questions. What roles can civil society play in building democracy, in propping up autocracy? Perhaps counterintuitively, but what we see throughout much of the non-democratic world, actually, that civil society props up autocracy. So just asking and exploring these critical questions. In none of my courses are there right or wrong answers. I am not in the classroom to deliver to deliver truths or to adjudicate between fact and fiction. Not at all. My role is to facilitate student inquiry and students' cultivation of knowledge, rather than just providing knowledge. Now, the students build knowledge themselves through this critically and globally informed approach.
I greatly appreciate how you described that. Your answer, you kept saying questions, 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 questions. You're not handing people the answers. We're challenging them with these complex issues to help them just marinate in that and think through that and prepare them to be critical thinkers in civil society, including through the philanthropic sector. And Dr. Herrold, you are an interdisciplinary scholar, as you talked about your own preparation and then your own subsequent work. Can you please describe for our audience the interdisciplinary approach to our degree programs? It's not just business. It's not just philanthropy. You have training as an economist. You have training in political science. And we have faculty members who are sociologists and trained in psychology and history and ethics and all these different types of areas. Can you help our audience understand the student experience that occurs because of this interdisciplinary approach?
To my mind, it's a very exciting, stimulating student experience, one that prepares our students to be leaders, not only managers. Sure, they gain critical technical skills that will help them as they advance their careers and will certainly build their CVs. But they also cultivate their leadership skills. Again, that the ability to think across disciplines, to ask questions across disciplines, to seek to build one's own knowledge across disciplines. That all involves the type of creative thinking, the type of creative problem solving that today's and our future leaders need, and that that we're so fortunate to have within civil society, and that we need to continue to cultivate within civil society moving forward. Again, as we envision this new normal, I believe that our nonprofit sector has a key role to play. And I firmly believe that we at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy are training the nonprofit leaders of tomorrow.
Well, your passion for your research is evident. Your passion for applying your research is evident, and even passion for students has been evident throughout this conversation. But Dr. Herrold, if I could ask you to sum up, what does success look like for you with students, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's at other academic engagements, events, conferences, things of that nature, or even when they are alumni, either working in the sector, working in the academy, if they've earned a doctoral degree from us? How would you describe what success looks like as you serve our students?
Our students teach me so much. I mean, in terms of, let me ask you, what do you mean by success? Success for whom? Success for the students?
Yeah, and it just as you serve them, whether it's in the classroom, as you form that professional academic relationship with them, either for one semester or for some of them I know, and as I teach at the school as well, some stay in touch with us after they graduate.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you as you do this work as a member of our faculty?
Sure. So success for me is when students are actively engaged, are truly taking ownership of the knowledge development process. As I said, we're not here to be delivered knowledge. We are here to cultivate and build knowledge. So success for me is when students are engaged together and with me, because they teach me so much in building that knowledge. And I see among our alums a continued engagement with the school, but also their leadership in civil society, in the nonprofit sector, in the United States and globally. Just that engaged student, which we're so known for. Teaching for me is so much fun because of that student engagement. So really, that to me is success. That engaged cultivation of knowledge and continuing to give back in an engaged way. That's really, to me, the signal of success.
That is so well said. I love how you summarize that. We don't just deliver knowledge, we cultivate and build knowledge to all those positive results that you explained. Dr. Catherine Herrold is an esteemed member of our faculty at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz.